The shrill blast of Karen Wilkinson's car horn shattered the Saturday morning quiet of Oakwood Estates. 3 long, deliberate honks that made birds scatter from nearby trees and curtains twitch in neighboring windows. Absolutely unacceptable. Karen slammed her car door, phone already in hand, camera app open. The red-faced woman in her crisp beige pantsuit marched across her immaculate lawn toward the eyesore that appeared overnight. A dumpster. A massive rusting metal dumpster sat in the Robertsons' driveway next door, violating at least 3 separate HOA regulations according to Karen's mental rulebook. Mike Robertson was halfway up a ladder when Karen's shadow fell across his yard. He closed his eyes briefly, shoulders tensing before forcing a polite smile. "Morning, Karen." "Don't morning Karen me." She thrust her phone upward, snapping photos of the dumpster from multiple angles. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no waste receptacles may be visible from the street except between the hours of 6 p.m. the evening before collection and 8 p.m. the day of collection. Mike climbed down his ladder with a sigh. "It's temporary, Karen. We're just replacing the roof. The company's coming Monday to haul it away." "Then they can bring it Monday." Karen snapped her French manicured finger, jabbing toward the street. "This is a violation, and as HOA president, I cannot allow exceptions. The property values in Oakwood Estates depend on uniformity and adherence to our guidelines." From inside the house, Mike's wife, Emily, appeared at the door, shoulders slumping when she spotted Karen. Their 8-year-old daughter peeked around her mother's legs with wide eyes. "The roofers are coming in an hour," Mike explained, straining to keep his voice level. "We can't just. I don't care if Jesus himself is coming to re-roof your house," Karen cut in, already typing furiously on her phone. "The bylaws exist for a reason. You'll have a formal violation notice by noon and a $200 fine if it's not removed immediately." Emily stepped onto the porch. "Karen, please, be reasonable." "We have all the permits." "Reasonable." Karen's voice climbed an octave. "I've been reasonable for 15 years, keeping this neighborhood from turning into a slum. Look at the Henderson place since they put in that." She shuddered dramatically. Above-ground pool. A few neighbors had emerged onto their porches now, watching the confrontation unfold. Karen noticed and straightened her jacket, projecting her voice slightly louder. "Rules apply to everyone, Mike. No exceptions. Even when you repainted your house the exact same color, without committee approval last year," Mike said quietly. Karen's face flushed crimson. "That was an emergency repair after the storm damage. Completely different situation." Behind them, a white pickup truck turned into the cul-de-sac, the logo of Peterson Roofing emblazoned on its side. 3 workers in the truck bed looked confused at the gathering crowd. Karen spun on her heel, marching directly into the street, hand raised to stop the truck. Her designer heel caught in a small pothole, nearly sending her sprawling. She righted herself with a gasp, phone flying from her hand and skittering across the asphalt. "Do not bring a single shingle onto this property," she shouted, pointing dramatically at the Robertsons' house. "This project is in violation of Oakwood Estates regulations." The truck stopped abruptly. The driver rolled down his window, bewildered. Across the street, Ted Wilson, who served as HOA treasurer for 5 years before Karen ousted him in what neighbors still referred to as the gazebo coupe, stepped onto his porch with a cup of coffee, settling in for what promised to be the neighborhood's most entertaining Saturday in months. The roofing crew foreman, a weathered man named Ray with 20 years of experience, knew trouble when he saw it. He'd dealt with HOA complications before, but never quite like this. A woman in designer clothes practically throwing herself in front of his truck. "Ma'am, we have all the proper permits and homeowner authorization," Ray said, climbing out of his truck with a clipboard. "If there's an issue with the HOA, that's between you and the homeowners, but we're on a schedule." Karen snatched her phone from the ground, checking for damage before turning her attention to Ray. "I don't care about your schedule. I care about our community standards. And until this dumpster situation is resolved, you're not authorized to begin work." Mike Robertson ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Ray, I'm sorry about this. Can you guys give us a few minutes?" Behind them, Emily had stepped further into the yard, their daughter clinging to her leg. "Karen, our roof is literally leaking into Lily's bedroom. We've been waiting 3 weeks for this appointment." Karen's expression softened momentarily at the mention of the child, but she quickly steeled herself. "Then you should have consulted the Architectural Review Committee before scheduling. The proper forms take 2 weeks for approval." "We did submit them." Emily's voice cracked with frustration. "We never heard back." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "The committee has been backlogged since Janet moved to Florida. Not my department." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Susan and Bob Chen from across the street. The Parkers from 2 doors down. Even old Mrs. Finch had wheeled herself to the edge of her driveway to watch. Karen noticed the audience and squared her shoulders, drawing strength from the attention. Ted Wilson sauntered across the street, coffee in hand. Seems like a simple solution here, Karen. The Robertsons need their roof fixed, and they've jumped through all the hoops. Why not grant a temporary exception? Karen's eyes narrowed at Ted, her nemesis, since she'd overruled his proposal for community garden plots as potentially decreasing curb appeal. Exceptions lead to chaos, Ted. Today it's a dumpster, tomorrow it's pink flamingos and lawn gnomes. Before you know it, we're living in anarchy. Ray cleared his throat. Look, folks, I sympathize, but we've got 3 more jobs today. Either we start now or we reschedule for next month. Emily let out a small, desperate sound. Mike placed a protective arm around her shoulders. Next month is the rainy season, Mike explained. Our ceiling won't make it. Karen tapped her foot, enjoying having everyone's attention while she deliberated. This was what leadership felt like, making the tough decisions others wouldn't have the courage to make. Fine, she finally said, pulling out her tablet from her designer purse. I'll draft an emergency exception. But, she held up one finger. It will require a $350 administrative fee for the emergency meeting, and the dumpster must be covered with a neutral-colored tarp at all times when work isn't actively being done. $350, Mike exclaimed. That's not in the bylaws. Karen's smile was thin. Article 12, Section 4 allows the board to assess reasonable fees for administrative services. I'm being more than reasonable. Ted stepped forward. As former treasurer, I can tell you that's a misinterpretation off. Perhaps you'd like me to call an emergency meeting about those unapproved solar lights along your walkway, Ted? Karen interrupted sweetly. Ted's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes blazed. Ray glanced at his watch. Folks, decision time. We starting or not? Mike looked at his wife, his daughter, their home with the blue tarp still visible on one corner of the roof. Then he looked at Karen, who was already typing the violation notice on her tablet. Start working, Mike said firmly. We'll deal with the consequences. Karen's head snapped up. Excuse me. You heard me. Mike's voice was steady now. Do your worst, Karen. Write us up, fine us, whatever. But my family comes first. A murmur of approval rippled through the watching neighbors. Someone, possibly Bob Chen, actually applauded briefly before his wife elbowed him to stop. Karen's face flushed crimson again. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I'll have to call an emergency board meeting. This is insubordination. Karen's perfectly manicured finger jabbed 911 into her phone. The neighbors collectively gasped. Karen, you can't be serious, Susan Chen said, stepping forward. You're calling the police over a dumpster. I'm calling about trespassing and unauthorized construction, Karen snapped, holding the phone to her ear. This is private property subject to legally binding covenants. Ray and his crew exchanged uncomfortable glances. They'd seen HOA disputes before, but calling the police was a new level of escalation. Ma'am, Ray said carefully, we're just trying to do our job. The homeowners hired us legitimately. The 911 operator answered and Karen launched into her practiced emergency voice. Yes, hello? I need to report unauthorized construction taking place at 427 Oakwood Drive. The homeowners are in direct violation of binding neighborhood covenants and refusing to comply with. Mike gently took his daughter inside as Karen detailed their supposed crimes to increasingly confuse emergency services. Emily remained on the porch, arms crossed, a look of quiet determination hardening her usually gentle features. No, this is not a non-emergency situation, Karen insisted into the phone. Property values are at stake. Ted Wilson snorted into his coffee. Remember when she called the fire department because the Johnsons' Halloween decorations were excessively flammable? Karen shot him a venomous look while continuing her conversation. Yes, I'll hold for your supervisor. Ray approached Mike and Emily. Look, this is getting complicated. We can come back when things cool down. No, Emily said firmly. We've waited long enough. Lily's room has water damage and the forecast shows rain next week. Karen, still on hold with 911, marched over to them. The authorities are taking this very seriously, she lied, covering the microphone. I suggest you tell your workers to leave before they're cited. Ray looked uncertainly between Karen and the Robertsons. Years of experience had taught him when a job was more trouble than it was worth. At that moment, a silver Mercedes pulled into the cul-de-sac. Richard Wilkinson, Karen's husband, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and expensive glasses, parked behind the gathering. He approached with caution, like someone entering a minefield. Karen, honey, what's happening? I got 3 texts from Susan about some kind of standoff. Karen turned to her husband, relief evident on her face. Richard was a corporate lawyer, finally, someone who understood the importance of rules and regulations. Richard, thank goodness. The Robertsons are deliberately violating Section 7 with this monstrosity. She gestured to the dumpster, and now they're allowing unauthorized construction without proper approvals. Richard surveyed the scene. the neighbors watching, the roofing crew awkwardly standing by their truck, the Robertsons looking both angry and exhausted. Then he noticed the small blue tarp visible on one corner of their roof. "Karen," he said quietly, "is their roof leaking?" "That's not relevant to the covenant violation," Karen replied dismissively. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Neighbors recognized the expression, the internal counting to 10 that had become his coping mechanism during 15 years of marriage to Karen. "I think it's very relevant," he said finally. "Remember last year when our guest bathroom had that leak and we had the plumber come on a Sunday? That was against the bylaws too." Karen lowered the phone slightly. "That was different. That was an emergency. And this isn't." Richard gestured toward the Robertson house. The 911 dispatcher's voice could be heard faintly from Karen's phone. "Ma'am, are you still there? This really isn't a police matter. You need to contact your HOA board or—" Karen abruptly ended the call. "Richard, this isn't about the leak. It's about proper procedures. They didn't get final approval from the committee. The committee hasn't met in 2 months because you've been trying to replace Janet?" Richard asked pointedly. The neighbors murmured. This was new information to most of them. Karen's face reddened. "I've been extremely busy coordinating the spring planking schedule and auditing the fence height compliance." Richard turned to the roofing crew. "Gentlemen, please proceed with your work. I'll take full responsibility as vice president of the HOA board." Karen gasped. "You can override my authority." "Actually," Richard said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through a document, Article 5, Section 2 states that in matters of safety and structural integrity, expedited approval can be granted by any board officer. I'm invoking that now." The neighbors broke into spontaneous applause. Karen stood frozen, the ultimate betrayal etched across her face. Karen stormed toward her house, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip. The neighbors' applause still echoed in her ears, each clap a personal affront to her authority. Richard hurried after her, his placating voice only fueling her rage. "Karen, be reasonable. They have a child in there. It's just a temporary." She whirled around, jabbing a finger into his chest. "Don't you dare lecture me about being reasonable. I've spent years maintaining standards in this neighborhood while you've been too busy with your precious corporate clients to notice our property values increasing." Richard sighed. "Karen, it's a dumpster for 3 days, not a meth lab." "It starts with a dumpster," Karen hissed. "Then it's holiday decorations in February, then it's parking commercial vehicles overnight, then it's—" She lowered her voice dramatically. "Lawn ornaments." Behind them, Ray and his crew had already begun unloading equipment. The Robertsons had retreated inside, though Emily watched warily through the window. The neighbors were dispersing, though several lingered to exchange knowing glances. Karen stalked to her garage and yanked open the door to her immaculate shelving system, pulling out a 3-ring binder labeled HOA violations. Photographic evacuation. "I've documented every infraction in this neighborhood for 7 years," she announced, flipping through laminated pages of photos. "The garbage can left out overnight, Christmas lights in January, an unapproved birdhouse. Nobody takes our covenants seriously anymore. Nobody understands what I do to protect us all." Richard leaned against the wall. "Karen, honey, maybe it's time to consider stepping down as president. The stress isn't good for you." Her head snapped up. "Step down? So Ted Wilson can turn our median strips into vegetable gardens, so the Parkers can paint their shutters that hideous blue they've been plotting, so we can become like—" she shuddered dramatically— "Meadow Glen Estates." Meadow Glen, the neighboring development with its relaxed rules and diverse home styles, was Karen's nightmare scenario, despite their higher average home values and waiting list of buyers. "Their homes are selling for 20% more than ours," Richard pointed out gently, "because they don't understand resale sustainability." Karen slammed the binder shut. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. sharp." Richard checked his watch. "Karen, half the board is at the charity golf tournament this weekend. It's just going to be you, me, and maybe Deborah if her grandson's birthday party ends early." "Then we'll be a quorum of 3, Karen insisted. "We need to discuss strengthening the enforcement provisions and increasing fines." From outside came the sound of the roofing crew's heavy footsteps on the Robertsons' roof. Each thump felt like a personal assault on Karen's authority. "I'm going to document this whole unauthorized project," she declared, grabbing her camera. "Every nail, every shingle." Richard reached for her arm. "Karen, please, let go. Take a break. We could drive to that winery you like in Sonoma." She shook off his hand. "This isn't about wine, Richard. This is about principles, about maintaining standards, about leading." Her voice cracked slightly. Nobody else is willing to make the hard choices. As she marched back outside, phone in hand, Richard followed with resignation. 15 years of marriage had taught him when Karen was beyond reason. Karen positioned herself strategically on their immaculate lawn, zooming in her camera to capture the roofing crew at work. Ray noticed and sighed, but continued directing his men. An unfamiliar silver Audi pulled into the cul-de-sac, parking in front of the Chen's house. The prospective buyers made their hasty escape to the Chen's front door as Karen fumed. Richard placed a calming hand on her shoulder that she immediately shrugged off. Progressive HOA? Karen muttered under her breath. Susan Chen has been undermining me for months. First, that ridiculous pollinator garden proposal, now this. Richard checked his watch. I need to get back to the office. That merger isn't going to review itself. Fine, Karen snapped. Go. I'll handle this neighborhood crisis myself, as usual. As Richard drove away, Karen marched back toward the Robertson house where the roofing activity had intensified. Ray's crew had removed a section of old shingles, revealing water-damaged wood beneath. Karen positioned herself at the edge of the property line, documenting every detail with her phone camera. The rumble of a larger truck caught her attention as a delivery vehicle pulled up loaded with roofing materials. Excuse me, Karen called out as the driver prepared to back into the Robertsons' driveway. You can't park there. That's a violation of Section 9, paragraph. The driver, clearly forewarned by Ray, simply gave her a tight smile and continued his maneuver. Karen stormed forward, arms waving. I said you cannot park there. This entire project is under dispute. Mike Robertson emerged from his garage, face tight with frustration. Karen, please. They're replacing rotted wood now. It's worse than we thought. Not my problem, Karen said, though she glanced briefly at the exposed damage. Your poor planning doesn't constitute an emergency for the neighborhood. Actually, Ray called down from the roof. This is definitely an emergency now. This section could have collapsed within days. He pointed to a particularly damaged beam. See that black mold? That's a health hazard, especially for kids. A flicker of concern crossed Karen's face before she hardened her expression. Then you should have followed proper channels instead of. The delivery truck suddenly cut its engine, having backed partway into the driveway. The driver jumped out, face alarmed. Everyone stop. Don't move the truck anymore. Ray climbed down his ladder quickly. What's wrong? The driver pointed to the ground near where Karen stood. There's a gas line marker flag right there, but it's been knocked over. I nearly backed over it. Sure enough, a small yellow flag lay flat on the ground, barely visible against the grass. Karen stepped back instinctively. I don't remember any gas line markers, Mike said, frowning. We had all utilities marked last month before we scheduled this. Ray knelt to examine the area. This doesn't look like a standard utility marker. It's the wrong color and size. Karen, momentarily forgetting her crusade, moved closer. The gas company was out last week doing some kind of survey. It left flags all over the neighborhood. Did they tell you where they placed them? Ray asked. Karen's expression shifted to uncertainty. Well, no. I wasn't home when they came. They left a door tag saying they'd marked potential leak investigation sites. The word leak hung in the air. Ray stood up quickly. Everyone back away from this area. Mike, call the gas company right now. For once, Karen didn't argue. She stepped back toward the street as Mike made the call. Neighbors who had been watching from windows and porches began to emerge again, sensing a new development in the morning's drama. They say they'll send someone immediately, Mike reported after a brief phone conversation. Apparently, there have been several reports of gas odors in the area over the past week. Karen's righteous indignation drained away. Gas odors? Why wasn't the HOA notified? I should have received an official communication. Maybe they tried, Emily suggested from the porch. You've been at your sister's in Sacramento since Tuesday. You just got back last night. Karen opened her mouth to retort but found no ready argument. She had indeed been away, having left Richard detailed instructions about bringing in the mail and watering her prize hydrangeas. The sound of idle conversation died as a faint but distinctive odor wafted through the air, the unmistakable rotten egg smell of natural gas. Karen crossed the street toward her house, careful to stay within the safe zone designated by the emergency workers. She returned minutes later, clutching a plush brown teddy bear with a slightly worn ear. Lily, she called softly. This is Mr. Cuddlesworth. He belonged to my daughter, Madeline. She's in college now, but he was her special friend when she was your age. Karen knelt down to the child's level. I was thinking maybe he could keep you company until we can rescue Mr. Flopsy. Lily regarded the bear skeptically, then looked up at her mother for guidance. Emily nodded encouragingly, barely concealing her surprise at this unexpected gesture from Karen. He has a bow tie, Lily observed, reaching hesitantly for the teddy. Yes, he's very proper, Karen said with a small smile. Madeline made him wear it to all her tea parties. Lily accepted the bear, hugging it tentatively at first, then more tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Something twisted in Karen's chest, a feeling long forgotten beneath committee meetings and property value assessments. She stood quickly, smoothing her pantsuit and clearing her throat. Well, we need to focus on the evacuation now. I have the complete neighborhood contact list here, she told the officer, redirecting her energy to organization. I can help coordinate temporary housing arrangements. For the next hour, Karen was transformed. The same authoritative tone that had irritated neighbors for years now proved invaluable as she efficiently matched residents with hotel vouchers, arranged carpools for those without transportation, and created a phone tree to update everyone on the repair progress. Ted Wilson watched with grudging admiration. "I'll be damned," he murmured to Bob Chen. "She's actually putting all that nervous energy to good use." "She's always been organized," Bob replied, "just usually not for the greater good." Richard returned, having been called by several neighbors. He found Karen standing beside the emergency command vehicle, clipboard in hand, checking names off a list as residents confirmed their evacuation plans. "Karen?" He approached cautiously, prepared for the cold shoulder after their earlier confrontation. "Are you okay?" She looked up, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Richard, this could have been catastrophic. That gas line runs right between our property and the Robertsons. If it had ignited during our argument." He placed a hand on her shoulder, and this time she didn't pull away. "But it didn't. Everyone's safe." "No thanks to me," Karen said quietly. "I was too busy enforcing rules to notice the actual danger." Richard squeezed her shoulder gently. "You're helping now. That's what matters." A commotion near the gas company trucks drew their attention. Two workers were engaged in an animated conversation with their supervisor, pointing at equipment readings and gesturing toward the street. The fire captain joined them, his expression growing more serious as he studied whatever they were showing him. After a brief consultation, he approached the gathered neighbors. "Folks, we got a development," he announced. "The gas company has detected a secondary leak underneath the street itself. It appears the pressure from the first leak may have stressed another section of pipe." Murmurs of concern rippled through the group. "We're going to need to expand the evacuation zone to include the entire cul-de-sac and possibly the connecting streets," the captain continued. "This is now a level 2 gas emergency." Karen stepped forward. "What about Meadowlark Lane?" "It connects to our street, but it's part of Meadow Glen Estates." "Different HOA," she added reflexively. "Yes, they'll need to evacuate as well," the captain confirmed. "We'll need someone who knows the residents there to help coordinate." Karen hesitated only briefly. "I don't actually know anyone in Meadow Glen. We've never," she trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by the artificial divide she maintained between the neighboring communities. "I know some folks there," Ted offered. "My nephew bought a place on Meadowlark last year." The captain nodded. "Great. You two work together to spread the word. We need everyone within a 3-block radius out within the hour." Karen found herself staring at Ted, her longtime HOA adversary and now her unexpected partner in emergency management. "I guess we'll have to table our discussion about your unapproved solar lights," she said with the faintest hint of a self-deprecating smile. Ted's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Was that an actual joke, Karen?" "Don't get used to it," she replied, but without her usual edge. "Let's go warn the peasants of Meadow Glen about their gas crisis." As they walked toward the neighboring development, Ted cleared his throat. "You know, for what it's worth, those rules you're always enforcing, they're not all bad. Structure and consistency do have value." 3 days later, the residents of Oakwood Estates gathered in the community center, a modest building that had previously hosted contentious HOA meetings but now served as a reunion point. The gas company had completed emergency repairs, allowing families to finally return home after their hotel stays. Karen stood at the front of the room beside a folding table laden with coffee, donuts, and a surprisingly detailed map of the neighborhood's now repaired gas infrastructure. "If I could have everyone's attention," she called out, her voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone, but somehow softer around the edges. "The gas company has provided these informational packets about the repairs." She gestured to a stack of folders. "They have replaced over 200 feet of pipeline and have assured me, that they'll be conducting monthly inspections for the next year." The neighbors nodded appreciatively as Richard distributed the packets. In the corner, Lily Robertson sat at a children's table, hosting a tea party for both Mr. Flopsy, safely retrieved from her bedroom, and Mr. Cuttlesworth, whom Karen had insisted she keep. Additionally, Karen continued, consulting her ever-present tablet, "I prepared a neighborhood emergency contact sheet. It includes everyone from both Oakwood Estates and," she paused almost imperceptibly, "Meadow Glen." Ted Wilson raised his coffee cup in a subtle toast from the back of the room. Karen acknowledged him with a small nod. "Now, regarding the Robertsons' roof," Karen said, turning to where Mike and Emily stood. "The work has been temporarily halted due to the evacuation, but I've spoken with Ray from Peterson Roofing, and they can resume tomorrow." Mike's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's great. Thank you, Karen." Furthermore, Karen continued briskly, "the board, that is, Richard, Deborah, and myself, have reviewed the situation and determined that under Article 5, Section 2, this qualifies as an emergency repair situation. So all expedited approvals are officially on record. She handed Mike a folder with the HOA letterhead. All the documentation is in order. Emily mouth formed a small surprise. You didn't have to do that. It's simply following the bylaws, Karen replied with dignity, though a faint flush colored her cheeks. Properly interpreted, of course. Susan Chen stepped forward. Karen, many of us want to thank you for your help during the evacuation. Your organizational skills really made a difference. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, catching Karen off guard. She was accustomed to neighbors falling silent when she spoke, not offering appreciation. I was merely doing my duty as HOA president, she said automatically, then paused. But thank you. I'm glad I could help. Speaking of helping, Ted called from the back. I've been talking with some folks from Meadow Glen about that community garden idea. Turns out they have a vacant lot they're willing to share if we provide some of the setup costs. Karen's first instinct was to list all the reasons cross-development cooperation was impractical, starting with different insurance policies and ending with incompatible landscape aesthetics. Instead, she found herself saying, that's worth exploring. Perhaps a joint committee? The room fell silent, dozens of neighbors staring at Karen as if she'd suddenly grown a second head. What? She said defensively. It makes financial sense to share resources. Richard slipped his arm around her waist, giving her a supportive squeeze. Absolutely right, honey. As the meeting transitioned into informal conversation, Karen found herself approached by Emily Robertson, who held out a small gift bag. It's not much, Emily said, but we wanted to thank you for lending Lily your daughter's bear. It made a difficult situation much easier for her. Karen accepted the bag and peered inside to find a framed photograph of Lily's tea party, with both stuffed animals seated as guests of honor. Something caught in her throat. Madeline used to have tea parties just like that, she said softly. I have albums full of pictures. I'd love to see them sometime, Emily replied, then added hesitantly, maybe coffee next week, after all this settles down. Karen found herself nodding. I'd like that. As the gathering continued, Karen stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of freshly mowed grass. All cut to regulation height, she noted automatically, then smiled at herself. From the doorway, Richard watched her. You okay out here? Just thinking, Karen replied. Did you know that when we first moved here 15 years ago, I joined the HOA board because I wanted to build a community? Richard leaned against the wall beside her. I remember. You were full of ideas about block parties and welcome baskets.